everyone. It's James and Louise from the Property Education Company, and we've got a very special guest, Rick Lambell, who's one of our clients. He's had a very not so unique experience we found recently with a couple of banks, and we just wanted him to jump on board and discuss what he's currently been going through when it comes to get a loan application and assisting in that process. Now, all the information we're going to talk about today is general, and it is a story that Rick's gone through. We've had several clients going through a similar thing, but it's purely based on education and general understanding of these issues that can arise when people are applying for a home loan. And if anyone would like to discuss it, if you feel like this is an issue that could be affecting you, you're more than welcome to reach out to us at Property Yeah. So, Louise, Rick, thank you for joining me on my little interview series I've been doing.
Great to have Rick here, because Rick's been a long-term client of ours, haven't you, Rick?
Yes, that's right. Louise helped us buy our first house about 7-8 years ago, Louise. So, yeah, that's right.
We bought again and again, and usually no problems. And this time we're all ready to look at a refinance. And as we do a credit check on every client just to see what's happening with their file. And we were shocked to discover Rick had become self-employed just under 2 years ago, I think. Would that be right? Yeah. And you've always had a great income and you've always paid your bills on time. And suddenly we got this credit score that was not what we expected. So we said to you, what happened? And do you know, are you aware? And he's like, no way, that can't be right. And so we had aimed to get it sorted. So tell us what happened from your perspective.
Yeah, so I guess a bit of context. I started my business and I've got a small consulting business, and as you do as a small business owner, the first 2 years, there's lots of ups and downs, and you're very focused on just getting business in and watching cash flow and so on. So I went through a period, I guess, 12 months ago, 6-12 months, particularly busy period, and was transitioning from, we had a few personal credit cards, and then I got some business credit cards, and we're transitioning from one to the next. And I probably lost sight for a while just with my business on some of our personal admin and didn't really think too much about it. Was very focused on the business, and then obviously approached Louise and the team about a refinance, starting the process thinking, all right, well, business is about 2 years in now, things are getting stable growth, and this is a good time to look at refinancing. And then, as Louise said, much to our shock, my credit file came back as poor. And the reason for that was that 2 credit cards that were not being used had very small amounts, fees rolling over, and a number of payments had been missed. And what happened was that Louise obviously alerted me to the issue, and quickly got on the phone with one of the providers who were quite understanding, because their card had been closed as well, because I was shutting some old cards down at the time. And so they were quite understanding and reviewed the credit file and the credit agencies, and had that essentially the record cleaned as on time.
That was a really important point, because you got an early indication of improvement, and we got a much more positive credit file from that one phone call, didn't you? Really?
That's right.
We got some improvement straight away.
That's right. So that was one experience, but the other experience was not so good. And that bank, unfortunately, explained there's nothing they can do about it, was their argument when I first called them, and that they have a legal obligation to refer any missed payment over. It had gone from 30 to 60 days. And I was bewildered, because normally I would get a text message from this bank alerting me to a missed payment. And I had a clear history of clearing the full balance immediately in those cases. And that hadn't happened, but it wasn't really acknowledged in that first phone call. And it was quickly the efforts to shut down the conversation. So subsequently to that, obviously discussed with Louise, and decided that, look, this just isn't right, and lodged a formal written complaint through the bank's procedures. So they had clear procedures for that. So that was good. And I hadn't done this before, so I just followed that process and laid out the timeline and the evidence of when payments had been made previously and what had happened in this circumstance. So they then initiated a review, and this went on for sort of 2 to 3 weeks, where they looked at all the evidence, and they came back with a written report to me noting that, there'd been contact attempts via text messages on certain dates, and the call center, the collections team, had tried to contact me, but I had no record of those interactions, and I had a complete history of text messages from the bank. And so at that point, obviously not satisfied with that outcome, I then lodged a formal complaint with the regulator.
Yeah. And a lot of people may not be aware that this is something they can help with. have to try at the bank first. And if it's a reasonable thing you're asking and you have a damaged credit file as a result of 2 payments when you'd had a perfect history, it may seem a bit severe what they were trying to do to you. And so we complained at AFCA, and what happened, you had a significant change in circumstances, shall we say.
Yeah, that's right. So the AFCA, the process there enables you to upload evidence. And so I had records showing clearly, well, here's a miss. There's no text from the bank in question. And so I uploaded all the evidence, and I'd had missed calls, which came up as suspicious on my phone. So given the environment was scams and so on, I don't always immediately answer, but there'd been no left messages either. So all that evidence was provided. And then what happened was that went back to the bank, and they initiated another review. And very quickly, this time, it still took a couple of weeks, but they very quickly came back and acknowledged basically that there hadn't been a fair and reasonable time, or the contacts were not clear enough. And so they agreed basically to review and clean the credit file. So it took quite a bit of persistence. And I think that's sort of the key message today, is that there is those processes in place. I think it was a pretty good process overall. I obviously was a little frustrated that the bank had not taken the earlier evidence into consideration to the degree I thought they should. But to be fair, once all the evidence was on the table very clearly, and I could demonstrate, look, I didn't ignore any messages, I just never got them, and I had a good history otherwise, then they reversed the decision, and I was compensated with a small financial amount for my time as well.
Yeah, not an hourly rate, but something. Yeah.
That's right.
It was well worth your while. You said that you used some of the lenders, the way they'd assessed your credit, back to them in the AFCA process, and that was a tip you were willing to share with us here.
Yeah, so I mean, the argument they initially made with their response was very sort of legally based around, we have an obligation to do this, but it didn't sort of take into account principles around fairness, which they have to as well under the banking code, or at least not, in my belief, not to the degree they should have. So that was very much the written argument I made to the regulator, and that was, I guess, acknowledged fairly quickly once that argument was made. And like I said, it was a case of pointing out the principles, but also having the evidence, very clear evidence that I could present to support that case. And so once they did change direction very quickly to their credit.
Good. Well, we're delighted for you to get that positive result.
The fact that it's all cleared out as a positive outcome. But I just want to go back and talk now in hindsight of this whole experience. What would you say is one thing that you wish you'd thought of or wish you'd think of when trying to avoid this situation to begin with, now that you've gone through it?
Well, obviously don't have too many credit cards. But more than that, it was simple things like I had a direct debit on some cards and I didn't have it on another. So it's just silly, because there's just silly. Admin, life gets busy. It happens to everyone, right? Whether you got a business or not. And you just sometimes let things slip. And I just wasn't aware of the consequence of that. It never happened to me before. So just simple things about, like I said, direct debits and stuff. But in terms of the bank, I think it's just everyone's trying to do their job to the best of their ability. And I think even within the bank, people would just didn't interpret even their own policies correctly, in my view, in some cases. But, I don't blame anyone. It was just, it's important to be persistent. If you've got good evidence, don't give up, and you can get a fair outcome if you're clear and provide that evidence, I think.
Great advice. Also, what we would like to understand is when it comes to working with AFCA, the Australian Finance Complaint Authority, what was your experience when actually starting that conversation with them? Were they very responsive? How did they handle it? Because not many people may be aware that they can go to AFCA when there is an issue like this.
Yeah, it's a very clear process. I never actually spoke to anyone on the phone there. I mean, I just lodged on the website, followed their process for uploading evidence. You've given the options of how transparent you want to be with your information. So I was clear. I'm happy for all documentation to be shared with the other party. And so I think they immediately went back to the bank with the evidence, because the bank didn't have all that evidence at hand. They had their own version from their systems, but I had my own evidence saying, well, I never received that, and here it is. So it was a good, transparent process, I think. And they come back with a resolution in writing. You have the option of accepting or taking it further, and you can then make a decision to sort of close the case. So in my case, it was very efficient. It was very quick, very efficient. Couldn't really ask for more. And once the evidence was on the table, everyone responded appropriately, in my view. So no, it was good. It was a good experience for both working with that complaint process.
Great.
Well, I'm thrilled that we got this positive results at the end of what was a surprising turn of events when applying for a very simple refinance application in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, is there any final thoughts that you had on this whole experience that you'd like to share?
Yeah, look, I think, like I said, it's just the persistence. Like it does feel when you're one person up against a bank, it can feel just quite daunting, I suppose. I do think the banks have got better processes in place than they used to for circumstances like this. They're pretty thorough, I think, and how they go through that. But still, there's just lots of grey areas, like I said, with people trying to do the best they can in their roles, and sometimes they don't get it right, sometimes they do. So, again, like I said, just comes back to that being persistent and being clear. I think that'd be a lasting message.
Fantastic. Being persistent is true because you're not the only one this has happened to. Recently, we have had 3 or 4 files that have come up with bizarre credit files. And one was an example where we did a pre-approval for a client in October and that expired, and we have to do a new one for his purchase now. And unbelievably, their score had changed significantly due to circumstances like this. So again, he had to follow up and get it fixed. But the damage that the banks are doing now very quickly to your file can really make it impossible for you to recover if you don't get onto it. So it's worth looking at your credit file every year, at least once. It's a free look. Yeah. Make sure you go and check and see what's happening just in case there's anything untoward that's gone on. And you can do that at the credit reporting website and pull a complimentary credit file.
Yeah,
anyway,
I think that's great advice as well, Louise, because I had no idea and I would have kept going and we would have eventually hit another big problem. And it had an outsized impact on our ability to refinance. So it seemed crazy, but that was the reality of the situation. So you have to take it seriously, right? You got to take it seriously.
Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing. You're really marvellous to share your story, and we so appreciate you doing this, Rick, because it is a great example for others to remain aware of their credit position. Make sure your credit cards are paid on time, all your bills are paid on the day they're due, not a day or two after, because this is all noted now on your file. And if you want any general information or assistance, please just reach out. That's what we're here for. Thank you, Rick, very much. Lovely to see you, and we'll see you all next week.